Hello and welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be doing a basic base painting tutorial. So we're going to go over a nice easy simple basing that you can use for pretty much 99% of your models, be it 40k, Age of Sigmar, Lord of the Rings. You know, you can even use them for bolt action, those types of things. So what we're going to do first of all, I'm just going to run over a few bits that you'll need. So obviously you'll need a base. Any type of base will do. Circle, square, rectangle, oval base, anything you've got, anything that's on your army really. The second thing you'll need is you'll need some generic PVA glue. So this one I just got from Poundland. I think I've had this God knows how long, as you can see from the lid. It's a little bit worse for wear, but it still does the job. You'll need some basic sand. So this is a sand mix that I use. It's budgie sand, I think, and it's also some fine grade sand that you get in, builders' yards, those type of things. What I tend to do is, if I'm wanting a nice smooth, even sand, I will just get a little handful of this and run it through a little sieve, just to take out all the big bits. If I want a nice smooth sand, so you'll need that. The second thing you're going to need is some of these. So this is Clump Foliage type stuff. This is basically little tufts of grass that you can stick onto your bases. Most people use these in their day-to-day basing. It's an easy, simple way, an easy, quick way of doing bases. So normally what you'd do is you'd apply things like static grass, but if you don't have the time and you just don't really want to, for this measly sum of like £3, you can go out and buy some of these ready-made ones. And I use these quite a lot on my bases because they just work. The second thing you're going to need is you'll need some of this stuff. This is called Clump Foliage. So let me open up this tub. Inside here is this little stuff. So what this is like a moss type of lichen thing. So what we do is we end up sticking these. I know it looks like something else, but we won't get into that. You end up sticking these on your bases to look like little tufts, like little bushes, little tufts of foliage. It comes in big blocks like this. You can buy this from most craft supply stores. This one that I use is by a company called Java Scenics. What I do is I stick the labels on the tops of the tub so I know what they are. So if I ever have to reorder any, I can just I know which one I'm ordering. And I say this one was £1.65, and you got about 4 or 5 times the amount of stuff that I've got in here at the moment. Comes in quite a big bag. It's very good stuff to use. The second thing you'll need is you'll need either some slate chippings. So obviously I won't be using these on the tutorial for the bases I'm doing today, but the process still applies exactly the same. These are just some really small stone chippings. Basically I've got a big piece of slate, smashed it up into tiny small parts, and I use these for some bases. But the ones that we're going to be using today are these. So this is little plaster chips. These are what I tend to use on my bases for rocks because they just absorb paint a lot better, they stick a lot better, and I can get an entire massive great big tub of this for next to nothing. So the eagle-eyed among you would have spotted that this is actually cat litter. So what with me having a cat, we've got this in the bag full. So I've got about 2 tubs full of this, and this will probably last me my entire hobby life, this entire tub. But as you can see, they come in all different shapes and sizes. So you've got flat ones here, you've got little ones that look like chunks of rock. But a big bag of this costs about £1.70 from Tesco's. As far as I'm aware, Tesco's is probably the only one that actually sells it like this. Don't get the other types of cat litter, that's stones, because they just won't work. But as you can see from here, there's all different types of textures. So we'll be using this on our bases today. And there is also a few other things that you can use which are optional extras. So one of them being this. So these are basically little seeds off a birch tree. But the good thing about these is they actually look like little leaves. So these birch tree seeds look like little tiny leaves that you can use as like a scenic photo, like a flock or a scatter. There you go, you can see them there on my finger. So what I do usually in the winter time, autumn time, I go around, there's a couple of birch trees in a forest near me. I'll go and grab, a little tub of this. I've had this tub nearly probably about a year now. And that's pretty much it. So without further ado, what we'll do is we will start. So I shall run you through a few bits. Obviously, I'm assuming you all know how to apply, PVA glue to a base and then put the sand on. The main thing we do first of all though is, here's one I've done earlier. What we do is we take those little plaster chips and we stick them down first with dabs of super glue. So I've put 3 on here. I'll put one there, and one here as well. These are just held on by your ordinary generic super glue. For this I tend to use just a little bit of Loctite. It's only about 3 or 4 quid. Stick them down. Once that super glue has fully dried, we'll then go over the base with just a normal scraggy little brush like this. Slop on the PVA, making sure not to get any on the stones, get it all underneath. And then what we do is then get the sand and we sprinkle the sand over the top. So what I've done for these bases is I've taken my sand mixture and I've passed it through a medium grain sieve. So this is the kind of sieve that you'd use for flour, sugar, that type of thing, just to aerate the flour, get out the lumps in the sugar. It lets a bit pass through, but nothing too fine, nothing too big. What I did was I sieved that into a little tiny tub and then I used that to sprinkle over the top. We then sat this aside, left that on the side to dry for at least an hour, just to make sure this glue is all set. And as you can see, set lovely. And these rocks as well, they won't come off because they're all super glued down. This is why I tend to use the plaster chips a lot more, because they do tend to stick a lot better to plastic, what with them being made of plaster. So they're a bit more absorbent. They do form a better bond than slate does. I've had slate before come up off the bases, mid-game when I've held it down with super glue, but these, as you can see, they're not going anywhere. So once that's dried, what we do is we then apply this nice little paint here. So this is Banshee Brown. What we'll do is we then apply this onto the base. We do a nice kind of thickish coat and you'll end up with this. So what I've done is I've painted over the whole base with the Banshee Brown. As you can see, you've still got the sand texture. I've covered the rocks as well, just so when we do paint over them, if we do leave any spaces, it will add a nice little bit of shadow or gradient. What we do is we let that dry and then we move on to the next step. So I'll put the paints over here that we use. So the next paint we use will be this, XV88. So this is another base paint from Citadel. This is a base paint as well. The irony is we're using them for bases. What I do now is, this is kind of just a scrappy tub of this. I don't really tend to worry about watering it down or anything. As you can see with the Games Workshop paints, they do clump up. They do clump up quite a bit. But what we're going to do is we're going to be applying this with a cheap little makeup brush. So this is again one of my little makeup brushes that I got from a kit. And I think I got about 20 or 30 of these brushes for about £3. So what we do, dab the paintbrush into the pot, go over to our palette, we rub some of the paint off, just so we get it to a nice little dry brush consistency, but still with just a little tiny bit of paint left on the brush. And then what we do is we just go over the whole thing and give it all a good dry brush. So what this is going to do is this is going to add a little bit of more of a dynamic colour on top of the Mornfang. So you'll still have the dark brown showing through underneath, but what this will do is this will give it a nice little highlight layer. So just keep loading up your brush a little bit, brushing just a little bit of the paint off, and then just running over it nice and gently, just to give it a little bit of a dry brush. Don't worry about the rocks, they'll be getting painted towards the end. There we go, just like that. So I don't know if you can see that, but you can see it's got a slightly lighter tone to it now. So what that's done is that's now brought up the Mornfang level from that to about that. So the only reason why we used the Mornfang as the base is so we don't get the black showing through, because otherwise it would just be a black base with some brown on top. Once we've done that, we'll then move on to our next colour. So this is the colour I'll be using today, which is called Banshee Brown. You can always use bleached bone if you need to. I don't know what they call it nowadays, but I'm still rocking this old school bleach bone tub. I've had this for many years. It is kind of the same colour, just a little bit of a difference in the two. But what we're going to do, I'm just going to pop a little bit of this onto my palette. There we go. And what we're going to do now, I haven't even bothered to wash off the paint on there because, you know, it's not going to make much of a difference, and you don't want to run the risk of having a bit of paint, a bit of water left on your brush, and then going to apply that to the base and that just soaking it through. So what we're going to do, we're going to get a bit on the base, on the brush, sorry. Got to get our base again, and this time what we're going to do, we're going to do a really light dry brush. So what I mean by that is you're just going to brush it ever so gently back and forth over the model, and then you'll see as I do it, as you can see there, you'll see the colour starting to pop through a little bit. So I'll just load up a little bit more on my brush, and then we just drag it across nice and lightly, like that. You can see more on the rocks where I'm starting to edge highlight them a little bit. Obviously these rocks will be getting painted straight after, but just go around the whole base, just dragging the brush off over the top, nice and gently, just like that. A little bit more paint on the brush. So you don't want it too light, but you don't want it too heavy, so you just want it to be able to just bring out the top level of colour, just to add a little bit of depth and a little bit of layer. So as you can see now, that has now given that a nice little highlight and really brought out the base. So obviously the next stage of this will be to paint the rocks. So what I'm going to do, just going to wash my brush. The good thing about these makeup brushes is, you know, once they get to a point where they're really bad, you're not going to worry about having to throw them in the bin because they've cost you literally pence. Whereas if you paid £3 or £4, you know, for a specific dry brush from like Games Workshop or similar company, you know you're going to feel bad throwing that kind of money down the drain. But with makeup brushes, they're just so cheap and cheerful, there's no real need to worry about them. That's why I tend to use them mainly for bases. What we're going to do now, obviously we've used our colours there. I'm now going to pop some of this on. So this is Mechanicus Standard Grey. Again, a base paint, the irony. What we're going to do, I'm just going to crack the lid. So this is actually a brand new pot that I've just got. There we go. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to take my normal everyday paintbrush that I use. Just going to load a bit up on the brush. So as you can see there is a nice little dollop on the end of there. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go around and I'm just going to paint every single one of these rocks. So what this is going to do, this is just going to bring out the detail on the rocks, and then you'll be able to differentiate them between obviously the base. Because if we just left it as it is, you wouldn't know what's rock, what's dirt, and there's no real difference between the two. So just go around the model, go around the base. You can do this while you have models attached to the base if you need to. Obviously what I tend to do when I do my models is I tend to stick my models to temporary bases. So I've got a big bag that I use full of all scrappy bases, and what I'll do is when I build my models or a unit, I'll stick them on those bases, and then I'll do all my paint on while they're attached to them. I only stick them on loosely though, so just using like a little tiny dab of super glue. But what this does is this allows me to then do the bases separately. So, you know, if I'm doing detailed bases or I'm doing a specific type of paint scheme that's going to be different to the model, I can then do these separately. But obviously, if you need to do these while these are stuck to the bases, you know, just do the exact process I've done, but just being a little bit careful around, you know, the model's feet or legs. Okay, so right, there's all the grey painted now. So the rocks has already started to pop out, which is good. You know, they're becoming their own little feature. What we'll do, we'll just leave that to dry just for a minute. And obviously what we're going to do after this, we're just going to bring it up with a little bit of a dry brush using, again, a lighter colour. So that was the Mechanicus Standard Grey that we've used. And this is the good thing about these bases, is you can do these in batches, you know, so you can do 1 or 2, or you can do 30 or 40 all in one go. There's no real, you know, good or bad way to do these. So obviously that's now dry. This dries very quickly because you're only using a small bit. We're going to be using this. So this is a layer paint, our first one, and this is called Administratum Grey. So what this is going to do, this is just going to be a little bit of an edge highlight just for the rocks. So when we do the dry brushing like we did earlier, we just load a little bit up onto our brush, pop over to our palette, brush off most of the paint. Again, I'm just using the same little dry brush, makeup brush that I used before. And then what I'm going to do, I'm just going to drag this lightly over the top of the rocks. Just like this. So what this is doing, this is now creating a little bit of, like a little bit of detail just on the rocks, which means it makes them stand out just a little bit more. Give that a nice little edge highlight, just like that, just running the brush over. Nothing too dramatic. Obviously you can, if you want to, take this to the next level, and you can do a dry brush of white if you want. But me personally, I wouldn't really bother because it's not necessarily needed for this stage. Obviously these are just your generic basic bases, so these are going to be on your foot troops. These are going to be on pretty much 90% of the models you have on the table. You're not going to want to spend like an extra step if you're doing 20 or 30 bases. That's an extra 10-15 minutes on the time, so it depends if that's the kind of thing you want to do. But the stage that I do next for me personally is this. I use Dark Tone from Army Painter. So what I'll do is I'll bring in my normal everyday paintbrush again, just your generic average paintbrush. I'm just going to load a bit onto my brush. So you've got a nice little dollop there, as you can see. And then I'm just going to wash this just straight over the top of the rocks. And what this is going to do, this is just going to sink into all the cracks, all the little crevices, and it's just going to give it a little bit of shade and a little bit of depth. So that'll get in all the little cracks and crevices and little nooks and crannies. But the good thing about dark tone is when it dries, it doesn't leave that weird kind of chalky residue or those little puddles of dryness that you get from the Games Workshop's Null Oil. I used to use Null Oil quite a lot in my painting, but since I've been using dark tone, I don't really tend to go back to Null Oil anymore because it just has a better finish to it. Obviously it can leave quite a glossy finish, but once you've matted everything down with some spray or some matte varnish through an airbrush, doesn't really matter, to be honest. So as you can see, I've just put the wash on there now. That's drying very, very nicely. And as I said, because you're going to use it on such a small area, it won't take long to dry. So now the next part of the stage is we are going to be adding some of this and some of this. So with these do come in little sheets, so they're on like little greaseproof paper sheets. They are, you can use the normal static grass if that's something you want to use, but for me personally, for a little bit of speed, I tend to go with something like this. So you'll get them on these little bits of paper, little greaseproof paper sheets, and all you have to do is find the one that you want. So I'm going to take this little lump here, and then you just pick your base up. You plop a little tiny bit of super glue onto the base, and then you just stick that down. So what I tend to do with mine is I get my hobby knife, I just stick it into the middle, and I just push down slightly just to give it a better grip. As you can see, you've got a nice little bit of grass on the base now. So we'll put another little bit on there as well. So I'm just going to get this little bit here. And what I'll do with this bit, I'll just put this over the other side. Right there. Just like that. And then I'll just push that again with my hobby knife. Pluck out any of the loose bits. There you go. So we've added the two little clumps. That's pretty much all we'll use onto there. These little sheets, they do come in a lot more different colours and different shades. You can get ones that are like winter tufts. There's different companies make these as well. Me personally, I tend to go with the gamer grass stuff just because I find it's a lot more better quality than most, and it comes in a lot of different shades. And for $3.99, you're getting 70 little tufts. You can't really complain at that. the next stage we're going to be doing, we're going to be adding some of this. So this is the little clump foliage that I showed you earlier. What we're going to do, we're just going to pull off a little clump of it, which is why it's called clump foliage. So rip it down to the desired size you want. Size up the little bit you want to put it on. So I want to put it there. Should I use a smaller part? No. What I'm going to do now, normally people do say stick this down with PVA, but me personally, what I'm going to do is I'll apply this with a little tiny bit of super glue, just mainly because the clump foliage itself is quite absorbent, you know, and it is can be quite flimsy. So just attaching it with super glue, you got pretty much a good chance of it just coming straight off. But I'm going to get my super glue, apply a little blob to the base, just like that, as you can see it there. And then what I'm going to do, get the flat side of my clump foliage, going to get the super glue, and I'm just going to press that down like so. And that is pretty much it for the basing. There's only one more step that I usually tend to do, and that's that I take some matte black. Then what I'll do is I'll just go around the edge of the base just to clean up any of the dry brushing or painting that we did earlier. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to get my scrappy old brush again, just going to pop a little bit of black on, and I'm just going to go around the edge just to neaten up. So this isn't diluted or anything, this is literally just straight out of the pot. Just going to go around every single edge. As you can see here, where all the brown is ran over, you know, this is the reason why we do this stage, just to make it look a little bit neater and a little bit more pleasing to the eye. So just load your brush up with black. One more bit to do. And there you go. And then we just leave that to dry. So obviously what you can do if you wanted to, you can apply things like leaves or different coloured static grasses. You can even apply your own type of static grass. You know, you can do anything you want with these, because these are a basic type of base. You know, these are just kind of like a little bit of a starting point as to of where you can go with it. That's why I tend to do these bases quite a lot, especially for Lord of the Rings. They do work quite well for Lord of the Rings models, but with pretty much most of the models being based outside anyway. You know, you've got like Riders of Rohan, you've got the Uruk-hai, you've got Dunland, anything that, apart from obviously Moria goblins and maybe orcs, you can pretty much use this basing tutorial for them, which is you know, it's quite good. But that's the row of paints you need. So it's not that many when you come to think of it. You've got 2 browns. Obviously, you've got your beige / off-white. You've got your grey. You've got your lighter grey. You've got a wash. And you've also got a matte black. So most people will have these colours in their palettes anyway. You know, so it's not too pricey on the old wallet. You know, it's quite cost effective. And the good thing about Army Painter is their paints are cheap. So all these colours you see here by Games Workshop, you can get these in Army Painter as well. You know, just to, if you wanted an alternative to the Games Workshop ones. Obviously these are about £5 a pot, about 3 or 4, about £4.50 a pot now I think. Whereas these ones are about £2.95. You know, and you're getting, I can't remember how much you're getting these. 18mm in that one. And you're getting 12mm in these ones, you know, and obviously these ones aren't going to dry out as quick, but you know, use anything you want. You can even use wall emulsion, you know, if you're doing this on a big scale, you know, you want doing a game board or a display board, you can use the exact same procedure, exact same process, and you can, you know, do it on a larger scale. But that's your finished base, ready for a model to be stuck down on it. And there you go. Easy as that. So I hope you all found this a little bit interesting. You know, obviously this is a basic base painting tutorial. I'm assuming most people know how to do bases, but for those of you out there, you know, getting new into the hobby, these kind of things are always kind of invaluable to have, just so you can get your stuff done, get on the table, get it looking presentable, you know, something you can be proud of, you know, nice decent looking army. But yeah, so I hope you all had a good time watching this. Obviously, go over to my Instagram and my Facebook, drop me a like, you know, put a comment on there, show me the work that you've done if you've used these techniques in any way. I'd be more than happy to hear from you. I reply to people really quickly. And I hope to see everybody in the next video, which we will be doing some snow bases instead. So I'll see you all in the next video, and happy wargaming.